Hey, welcome to Lesson 2, where we are going to be talking about the lenses, to see the equipment we're going to be working with, and what effects these different lenses are going to have on our photos. The lenses have different parts, and they are going to help us control parameters like the diaphragm, which is the hole the light comes in through. We can work with a more open diaphragm or another more closed. And this, as well as controlling the amount of light we get in the camera, is also going to let us control the focus effects. Here is the lens. Like we were seeing in the last lesson, here we can see the focus mechanism, auto or manual, which is going to calculate the distance between the objects so that they are clean and we can see them properly. And then, thirdly, we're going to see the focal length. We're going to be calling this the zoom ring on our camera. This is going to allow us to change the coverage angle when we are taking our photos. We're going to be able to open it up with lots of information and details in the scene. Or we could also make it a little bit smaller so that it focuses on the area of the image, and so that it takes away elements that can distract us in the composition. Also, focal length has its own characteristics, so each one is going to give us their own effects. Later, we are going to be doing a practical exercise so we can see how the focal length works. So guys, I've brought in a few lenses. I've got the basic one that came with the camera. That would be 1855. Which refers to the focal length. But what actually is the focal length? Well, I'm going to show you a button that's on your camera. It's not very visible. It's a circle with a line. Don't know if you can see it. And don't worry if you cannot find it in your model, because some models don't come with it. The focal plane that's situated on this line is telling us that here is where we are going to be making that digital image. Here's our sensor. If we had an old-time camera, this is where the film would be. And what's focal length? Well, actually, when I have a lens and with zoom, we are going to be able to change the coverage angle, and we are going to be allowed to change that focal length. Look at what's going to happen. The lens moves, right? It goes forward and backwards, so it's closer or farther away from the sensor. And this is what lets us change the coverage angle. When we talk about focal distance, it's good to keep in mind that if we are going to be using an angular lens, we're going to have an angle that's quite wide, but we are not going to be able to get to details that are far away. If you need to get closer to the object, we are going to have to use longer focal distances, it is, telephotos. But, as you can see each time that this gets, that the elements that are far away, we are actually losing lateral coverage of what we are shooting. I can see as much information in the scene because we are going to be closing that angle, getting closer to the object. When that lens gets close to the camera's body, we are talking about short focal distances, the angular ones, okay? These lenses let us get a quite wide angle, and we'll have the advantages of being able to get more quality, but also we're going to get a little bit of blur. Later, we're going to talk about the camera, and in the practice exercise, what the deal with those distortions are and how we can solve them. Then we have focal distances that are a little more closed. They are called normal focal distances. And then we have the telephotos that allow us to get close or maybe more rich in the scene. This is kind of a standard lens, 1855. We're going to have the angle of 18. The normal is going to be between 35 and 50, and from 50 we are going to be looking at telephoto. Depending as well on the lens that you have, you're going to have more of a coverage angle. angle. This one goes to 55, and this one, for example, covers from 18 to 200. Okay? We're going to be testing this so that you can see that when you're taking photos, this is going to be the first decision you are going to be taking. For everything I have in front, what do I care about? Do I want to capture this? Do I want this detail here? And local distance is also going to condition our image. First, because of the distortions, there isn't a perfect lens, depending on the construction they have. Sometimes we are going to get those distortions, and they could be a lag in illumination, for example, in the corners of our image, or a halo of color that would be a chromatic distortion. A color halo is like a little blue colored cylinder that can show up in certain images. Or maybe as well, we are going to find one of the most seen ones that you're going to work the most on, with the actual distortion from wide-angle shots. They let us get those wide shots, but they kind of curve the image. Later, we are going to see how to correct that distortion changing the focal distance, or for example, in this camera model, as each camera is how different worked. You're going to have to see where each of the options we are going to be working on in this class are in your camera. Maybe it's Nikon, Canon, Sony, or wherever. Some things might not be on your camera, or they might be there, but not as extensively. But don't worry, because the most important things are normally in all the cameras. This camera, for example, here in the menu, has a part on lens aberration correction. What I was saying, no lens is perfect. They all have some kind of aberration, some might be because of illumination, color, distortion. And in this case, this model has all three corrections to avoid vignettes, chromatics, and distortions most of all. And we are going to be working with this in the exercise. Another interesting thing about the lenses is that you are going to be able to find fixed lens, a 50mm lens. And what does it mean? I have only one visual angle. If I want to get close or far away, I have to be the one to move. However, zoom lenses are much more useful, and they let us adapt to different situations with a bit more ease. What's the ideal option? Well, in my opinion, we have a lens with a variable focal range, and one that's fixed, because they give us a better image quality and can give us color blur effects that are more pronounced, because they let us open up the diaphragm a little more. So, the fixed one might be more difficult to get used to, but with time we are going to get better results. To start with, to do this course, however, we are going to be using the lens that came with your camera. In the next lesson, I'm going to teach you the basic configuration for before you shoot. We can normally work in JPG or RAW. I'm also going to be talking about the advantages of each and my recommendations. Well, we've come here to practice shooting with different focal distances on one object that has straight lines, because what we want to know is to see what happens with the different focal distances and the distortions that we are going to get with different lenses. In this case, we are going to appreciate with this exercise most of all the distortion that this angular shot gives us, so that when we are in a situation that we have to get the straight lines, or when you don't want distortion, like maybe it's a portrait, don't use short lens or use the zoom so that you can get that focal length with no distortions. We can also activate the corrections option in the menu of the camera to get a better image. As we haven't talked about the necessary light adjustments, we can use an automatic mode for now, since we are just checking the different distortions of our lens. Let's do now another exercise related to focal length, so that, depending on the lens we are working with, we can see the difference between an angular distance and a bigger one. For example, I've chosen a 18-200 lens, and I'm going to take different photos at 18mm, 75 and 200. And you might ask, why? Well, first to check the range of the scene, since many elements come into play when using angular focal lengths. Secondly, if we use a bigger focal length, we'll notice how the different shots of the scene tighten it is. The background comes to a first place, and we get a detailed view of the object, losing information of the surrounding elements. Don't worry if your lens doesn't have a bigger length. You just can use the range given by it. Try it out with closer and bigger distances to see the differences between the object we are shooting and the background. Or you can give it a try with a general shot to check how the focal distance determines the coverage angle. Guys, this step is very important, and that's the first decision you have to make. See you next lesson.